Hi everyone, and welcome. My name is Anna, for those of you who don't know me, and I'll be facilitating today's session. And today we are honored to have Dr. Scott Frasard with us. Scott is an accomplished adult educator with 30 years of experience, a psychometrician, and a prominent autism advocate. In 2023, Scott was recognized by Neurodiversity World as one of the top 50 neurodiversity evangelists globally. Scott is also an author, recently publishing his first book, A Reflective Question to Ponder, 1,200 plus questions on autism to foster dialogue. The book is designed to encourage meaningful conversations by bridging understanding between autistic and non-autistic individuals through thought-provoking questions. Thank you, Scott, for taking the time to share your knowledge and insights with us today. A quick
Thank you,
note,
Anna.
yeah, thanks. A quick note on how we'll manage today's session, and then I'll hand it over to Scott. Please keep your microphone muted when you're not speaking. If you have a question, please use the raise hand option. If you prefer not to speak, you can type your question in the chat. To ensure that I read it, please start your question with read in capital letters. And feel free to share your thoughts in the chat throughout the session. It's always a treasure trove of valuable contributions. As always, let's maintain a respectful and welcoming atmosphere. Treat each other with kindness and consideration, and let's make this session a productive and enriching experience for everyone. Thank you. Take it away, Scott.
Awesome. Thank you, Anna. And thank you, Roger, for this opportunity. I'm really excited about being here today. I'm recognizing some of the names on this Zoom call, and thank you for being here to support, and thank you to everyone for that matter, but it's good to see some friendly faces here as well. If you have followed me at all on LinkedIn, you know that I ask a lot of questions about the autistic community, adjacent communities, experiences. The way I like to think of it is no topic is off the table, because I think dialogue, productive, fruitful dialogue, needs to happen everywhere when it comes to our autistic experiences. And so I'm going to talk about the approach that I take. I'm going to share some structure that I follow around my questions, and then also share some actual questions from my book. But I wanted to start off just with a short, reflective introduction activity. And on your screen, you should see this quote from Socrates. I'm going to let you read it silently for a moment. And if you're so moved to share, I would love to hear some thoughts you have about this quote. So I'm going to give you about 15 or 20 seconds just to read and reflect. Thank you. She put a statement in the comments if you're not able to see that. She said, as a former teacher, I completely agree. You can't put knowledge into someone's head. They have to know it themselves. Thank you for sharing. Would anyone else like to share? And feel free to come off mute and share in the group if you feel comfortable. Excellent. Thank you. How about maybe one or two more thoughts?
Hi, Scott here. So the strange thing is that I was educated quite well growing up, grade school, college. And even though I would agree with you that this would be the ideal way to go about getting somebody to learn, is that somehow in my case, I was taught otherwise. I was given facts and asked questions. It was a mix of both by people who were particularly passionate about their subject matter. But somehow that worked for me in terms of more of a mix of questions as well as facts and insights and ideas all rolled into a teacher's teaching style. That's what worked for me, but that's just me.
Absolutely. And actually, Socrates does address that as well, but we won't go too deep in all of the insights around that. But for just to kind of lay the groundwork, and we'll talk more about this later, is my philosophy around teaching and learning is that of a social constructivist. So to me, learning is about making meaning of whatever this new thing is that we're learning. And so, yes, I do agree with you that there are some technical things that maybe don't lend themselves well to learning the entire part, or whole for that matter, through questioning. There has to be, something else involved. But questioning, regardless of what is being taught, is a great way to get to the root of learning, which is that making meaning. So great question, great comment. I really appreciate it. So thank you for joining and sharing your thoughts. So, oh, I'm sorry. Did somebody have a comment?
Yeah, there are two hands raised up. I don't know if we want to move on or should we get back to that? I would like to share something also.
Oh, go ahead. I did not see those. I apologize.
Thank you so much. Greetings, everyone, and Happy New Year. My name is... And as a neurodivergent person, this really hits in a way that is incredibly meaningful because from my own lived experience, it reminds me of that age-old axiom. You can give a man a fish and he'll eat for a day. However, if you teach a man to fish, he'll eat for a lifetime. And there's something to be said about mentorship and also modeling behavior, especially for the acquisition of skills. It's more than knowledge, it's about skills. And to me, there's something about stimulating the mind to create the hunger and the thirst and the application of that information, understanding the relationship of the why it's important to know this and that kind of thing. And it's not lost on me in that just like no one can work out and get buff for you, you have to do it yourself. It's a process of engagement, and I think we've all known people where we were trying to force feed information and they just weren't taking it in. They weren't really interested, and by immersing oneself in the knowledge, like immersive learning, the knowledge is captured differently. The knowledge is captured differently. And so when a person learns through doing, they've got it, and they're also patterning their way to success, step by step, action by action, and it builds on itself because success leaves clues, and it's a learned behavior. So I'll stop there.
Absolutely. And thank you for sharing. I really appreciate that. Real quickly, and then we'll proceed on.
Yeah. So I'm very curious about the kind of your approach to framing these questions, Scott. Yeah, my background is kind of a mix of user experience research, you know, tech product discovery, and some neuro inclusion community building work. And something that I've run into a lot is that a lot of people, after going through the education system, this very like memorization, just having knowledge thrown at us kind of approach, then when people try to use a more Socratic approach, sometimes it doesn't stick. If we don't have the vocabulary to talk about our needs. And then even more so when people want a quick answer on how do we be neuro-inclusive from one person to represent a group. You know, I'm really trying to think through step by step, and a new project that I'm working on now is trying to come up with a framework for how can communities and gatherings be more neuro-inclusive. And yeah, just trying to think through how do we even think through this kind of thing. So yeah, just something I wanted to put out there, and I can drop a link for who runs a Twitch stream where she discusses this topic a lot, of developing that vocabulary.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. And great insights. And just to preface this, questioning is not the only way I teach or that advocate, but this is the mainstay of my advocacy approach. So, and that's what I definitely want to share with everyone. Just a real quick insight to my journey, just to kind of lay some foundation, is my entire life I always felt different, and I'm sure that resonates with pretty much everybody here. I always felt different in the things that I enjoyed, the friends that I had or the lack thereof, the way I do things, the things that bring me joy versus angst, that sort of stuff. I always felt different, and I never really knew why. Then when I was 47, my wife and I were watching this show on A&E called The Employables. And if you haven't heard of it before, this is a reality show. So yes, there's a bit of Hollywood in there. A reality show that follows neurodivergent people of different varieties as they try to gain work. And whenever they spotlighted an autistic person, I really resonated with that person. So as we watched episode after episode, I got more and more curious. I started doing some self-exploration, did the online quizzes that I'm sure we've all heard of. And it kept coming up that I might be autistic. And at one point, probably about the third episode in, I shared this with my wife, and she didn't seem really surprised. She took one of the online quizzes that I did as me, because she knows me better than I know me most times. And she actually scored higher than I did. And so we're both like, yeah, you probably are. So I wanted to know for sure. And that's really the only reason why I went through this formal identification. That, and at that point, I did not know that self-identifying was a valid form within the community. So I eventually did seek out, and shortly after my 48th birthday, I found out, yes, I am actually autistic. And that made things so clear for me. Of course, I went through this emotional roller coaster, trying to decide what this means for me, reflecting on my experiences from the past, relearning some of the stuff that I thought I knew about autism. I came up through the medical field. I was a paramedic for 22 years. So that medical model of disability, of autism, was firmly rooted in my head. But as I started learning about the community, the autistic community, and learning more from their perspective and reflecting on that through my own worldview, the things we had in common, it really started to click that, okay, a lot of the stuff that I thought I knew, I was actually wrong about. And it made sense to me because I heard others like me talking about it, and it felt right inside. And I'm like, okay, I can buy into that. And so I started shifting. I also started really paying attention to people who advocated for our community, and in particular, how they are advocating, what they're saying, and kind of putting that in conjunction with my own learning journey at this point. I started posting some occasional questions online and really starting to dig into other people's experiences to help inform my own. I'm not going to read all of this. You'll have access to this video, so you can certainly come back to it later on if you want. But these were the commonly observed advocacy approaches that I saw happening online. Oops, I do see a hand. Go ahead.
Anyways, I was very intrigued by your story of being diagnosed, and how you found it at 47. That's crazy. Me, I was born and I was diagnosed like because I had autistic tendencies and things like that. My parents were kind of unaware of what that was, and there wasn't much supports for people. So I kind of just drifted into things myself, and later on I got a neuropsych as an adult, and I found out I was what they call level 2, but higher functioning, which I hate those words. But my experience, even going back to your Socratic method and learning, I've always had this weird ability just to look at something and know how it works or whatever. Like I could see blown up schematics in my head when I'm working on things. That's my experience. But I wanted to share that with you. I think it's wonderful that people seek out things, especially you guys that, to me, a lot of you are just so much above my level of intelligence that it's just shocking that you guys kind of just shock me, a lot of you, because it makes me feel that I can be capable too. So thank you for sharing with us, and thank you for going on your journey. And that's it all.
Well, thank you. And I've got no doubts. You seem like a very intelligent person, and there's much that can be said about the whole intelligence thing, but that's beyond what we're here for. But thank you. And I was born in the early 70s, and had I been identified as autistic back in the mid 70s when most kids are, I think my life would have turned out very, very differently given the time frame. So these are some of the common approaches, and a lot of it being advocacy, not so much political or legal, a lot around educational or public awareness, and of course research and investigating things that maybe aren't directly supportive of the autistic community. But these are some of the things that I saw. And one thing that I noticed about all of these was it was unidirectional. It went from audience A, whoever that advocate or advocacy group is, to audience B, essentially whoever's going to be listening or whoever would listen. Something was missing here, because messages were being sent, but we're still talking about awareness. After all of these years, we still can't get people to see that autism exists. There's some sort of breakdown there, right? So I put on my change management hats, and I started doing some things. I engaged with people, anyone and everyone, to understand their perspectives. Something that's called dialogue. I set aside my values, beliefs, and assumptions so that I can listen to what others are saying. Whether they agree with me or not, I want to hear why they believe what they believe. Finding out about their preferences. And in doing so, I never judged people. I didn't correct people or educate them from my vantage point. Because as we all know, we've heard the saying, if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. So how is my singular perspective really that informative to others? So my goal was to foster dialogue to enrich this understanding. And in doing so, some really interesting things started happening in really short order within a matter of months of me starting this. Number one, more people were sharing their perspectives online, the ones that I was interacting with. This helped to build trust. And if you've ever done any sort of advocacy work or just self-advocating, unless you've probably noticed that unless you have other people's trusts, they're not really interested in hearing what you have to say. Am I correct? I built connections with people from all walks of life, with all different perspectives. I've met colleagues who have very different perspectives of mine, and we still are able to have a really good dialogue. People don't feel challenged when you seek to understand their perspective, which means their minds start to open. And I also started to notice more questions were being asked by more people. And in doing so, we had this multiplicative effect. And I started seeing more challenging topics, more taboo topics. And one of the things that I'm currently doing is a Taboo Saturday, where I dig deep into the topics that people don't even want to really address, and I ask questions. In doing this, voices get heard. I see you have your hand up.
Couldn't agree more, Scott. What I find during my author talks, of which I've done many, and every single one of them has a provision for Q&A with the attendees, getting to your point about having a dialogue, having bi-directional rather than unidirectional communication, is that if you listen to others and to what they have to say, they in turn are more likely to take what you have to share with them to heart. Because in my view, the challenge at hand for all of us who call ourselves advocates is to not only get the people who we're speaking to listen, but there's a difference between listening and actually taking what you hear to heart. And ultimately, that's what I feel matters. I would imagine you'd certainly agree with that, no?
Wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
And you've been a part of those dialogues, and you make a really good point in that, you know, if we aren't stopping to listen to them for something more than just to respond, but really truly learning their perspective, what gives us the right to think that they're going to do the same thing for us?
Correct.
We got to give to get, right?
Exactly. You get what you give.
Absolutely.
Two-way street. Exactly. Thank
So,
you.
Going from this audience A sends all their information or insights to audience B, this approach that I took, this dialogic Socratic approach, we have audience A, the advocates, and audience B, the receivers of that information, exchanging in ideas. And it doesn't mean that I have to believe what they're saying, and I may or may not change my mind, but minds are open, and this is what was missing. That back and forth dialogue is what was missing and what I was seeing. And so I took that opportunity to really lean into that, and it has really changed a lot of the narratives that I've been a part of. These are some of the key principles of Socratic advocacy that I use. You've probably seen these before. It's not rocket science, but it's something that is simple but extremely effective. Starting off, ask open-ended questions. Again, if you follow me, if you've engaged in the posts that I have, while I do include most times some sort of poll, which is just a mechanism to increase engagement, the questions that I'm really digging into are all open-ended. We also need to challenge assumptions. And this doesn't mean telling people they're wrong and this is what you really need to believe, but rather digging in and unpacking those layers of assumptions and asking, why do you believe that? Where did you learn that from? How would it feel if this, or those sorts of things? And we're going to get into that in a moment here. Encourage self-reflection. Ask questions back. Again, how did that make you feel? Focus on curiosity, not confrontation. Be really interested in what they're saying. Be curious about it. That's going to enrich you and show them kind of this good faith. I'm going to share with you and you share with me kind of thing, so that we can explore multiple perspectives. We want to seek underlying reasons for our thoughts and beliefs and feelings, so that we can truly understand how we get from point A to point B. Promote dialogue, not discussion or debate. Dialogue, again, is where we set all of our preconceived notions, our own biases, our own assumptions to the side, and truly hear the other person. Whereas discussion or debate is about asserting a particular position and trying to convince the other person that you are right. This isn't a debate. We want dialogue so that we have critical thinking. One of the big things that I really see a lot of engagement and thoughtful dialogue around is connecting those questions to some sort of lived experience. Everybody has some lived experience. Even when somebody is not autistic and you're trying to connect your autistic experience to their lived experience, there's something that can be talked about. Connect it to a lived experience and you will see an amazing dialogue happen. Another part, and this is true whether it's asynchronous or live, leave space for silence and thought. That's how we started off this conversation. Let people think about things. This promotes that critical thinking. It gives people time to consider what's being said through their own world lens. And if we don't do that, we're just building up a wall, or contributing to one at least. One thing that's really important that I believe wholeheartedly about, and I have a chapter in my book dedicated just to this, is that all perspectives are valid. For the person that holds a perspective, it is absolutely valid for them. Don't mistake validity with being correct. Correct is very relative, right? If we don't respect that multiple perspectives exist, we limit ourselves to this is the only way it can happen, and you have to believe it. We're not going to get anywhere with that. Take a quick pause for any questions or comments that you may have.
There is no questions in the chat box, but there are some interesting thoughts shared. A lot of people are loving your Saturday taboo Saturdays. I wonder whether that could be something we could do at 𝘗𝘶, although maybe that's a perilous road to go down on. And someone also shared In a world full of so many inflammatory conversations, simply asking questions about not being afraid of other people's answers will bring true healing. And a lot of people have liked that quote.
I completely agree.
What else have we got here? Yeah, I
Awesome.
think it's good for now. Yeah, if there's no questions, maybe we can move on.
Awesome. Thank you, Anna. So this book, The Thinker's Guide to Socratic Questioning, is really what got me started on this. I read this years and years ago, long before autism was ever a forethought in my mind. And this is a really short, thin reader. You could probably sit and read it in an hour. It's not really dense, but it talks about some things and provides guidance on how to conduct Socratic questioning to get the effect that you're looking for. They talk about these different elements of thought, the purpose of the thought, what is the question at issue, what is the information we're looking at, how are we interpreting that information and making inference from it, what are the concepts that we're building from this, what are those assumptions that we're making, and what are the implications and consequences of this thought and the various points of view. I'm not going to go into big detail about that because I think what's really going to work is to be able to see this in action as with examples of my questions, and we'll talk about those. But Paul and Elder talk about these, and that really helps lay the foundation for what kind of conversation or what kind of thoughts do we really want to think through and look for our different perspectives on. The other part is that they talk about are the types of Socratic questions. And this is where really we're taking that framework of thought and putting it into action with the things and the ways that we ask our questions. Whether we're asking a question about somebody's perspective so we gain clarity about what they're thinking, what they believe, the accuracy of maybe an interpretation or a stereotype that they have. Maybe we want to ask questions about the precision of their thought or the relevance of some sort of thought to a particular situation. We may want to ask questions about depth and breadth around a topic. Logic, how we go from point A to point B to point C, and some sort of logical progression so we can see how our differing perceptions change based on our logic through that. Then there are questions of significance and questions of fairness. Again, I think the best way to really illustrate this is to see examples of that, which brings us to, and hopefully this is going to be really helpful to kind of put all of these pieces together. These are quotes from questions from my book, and I have these parsed out as examples of each of these thoughts and types of questions. So a sample question targeting parts of thoughts. The first one is purpose. Why would you say that you are more than your diagnosis or you are not your diagnosis to a person who refers to themselves as autistic? I'm sure we've all heard that question before, but by asking this, we're really digging into the purpose for why somebody might believe you're more than your diagnosis. And as I go along, I'm not looking for answers for these, but if you have a thought that jumps to your mind, knowing that I do want to save some time at the end for Q&A, but if you have some thoughts, maybe pop them into the chat. And I see has his hand raised.
Yeah, can you go back to that last slide?
This one?
Oh, I guess it was the one we were just looking at then. with the question. Um, I get asked that, you know, a lot. Like, you know, why do you consider autism your identity or this and that? People feel that, and I've had conversations with friends that are veterans that have asked me, "Is autism's your identity?" And I'll be like, "No, it's not my identity. It's just an explanation of how I am." Um, and it's hard for people to kind of digest that. It's almost like they can't handle the fact that we're here, and you know they have to accept that some of us might be disabled by autism and some of us aren't. It can be confusing. Um, but you know, like I've been called out on my advocacy when I've seen a lot of advocacy for, let's say, veterans. Um, there's a lot of respect for that, but people aren't advocating for us enough, and it's we're not advocating for ourselves even in a lot of cases. So what do we do?
So to me, it's ask more questions. That's the approach. I see. We'll go to another example here.
Yeah, thank you so much. I love the conversation we're having and the information that you're imparting. I have a lot of lived experience with this that you're addressing, and I'm not going to say it's painful, it's frustrating more than anything because it reflects ableist mindsets. And in the case of where I've experienced it, they've been in mixed company groups. So I'm someone who identifies as neurodiverse. In addition to having ADHD and multiple traumatic brain injuries, I also have self-diagnosed myself as possibly having being on the autism spectrum. I don't know. There are just so many things that whenever I'm around other autistics or other neurodiverse persons and they identify as autistic, there's so many similarities in terms of lived experience, and there's a lot of intersectionality also with regard to lived experience when someone is presenting as neurodiverse, from brain injury that persons who live with autism also identify as experiencing. And I have found it incredibly marginalizing to suggest that I'm beating the drum for my limitations when my entire intention was really only to create contextual awareness.
Yeah.
Nothing more, nothing less. I'm like, what? You don't shame persons who identify as being low vision or someone is blind or they may have a mobility impairment, something that's not apparent at first blush, and someone may identify so that you can understand, oh, okay, I need to be mindful of proximity when I'm interacting with this person. It's just remarkable to me how persons project and hold us, to standards of, okay, now, why do you need to mention that? And it's not about apologizing, making excuses, nor is it arguing for limitations. It's really only to inform and create contextual awareness. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so these questions, and I do want to share the others, really helps to bring out all those contexts that you're talking about.
So that the right
Things can be talked about,
Yeah.
and we don't end up shaming people or marginalizing people in the process.
That's right. And then a lot of people can extend courtesy, grace, as well as reasonable accommodations given what you share. But if you don't share it and it's not outwardly apparent, how would they ever know? So I'm taking responsibility to inform the persons that I care about, hey, this is, the situation. I'm not wringing my hat in my hands and, apologizing for it. I'll just mention because I know I tend to present in neuro-quirky way. I call it neurospacey ways, that may give people pause and they're like, now that's interesting. Like, what was up with that? And so to me, sharing that, even like sometimes when I go shopping, I can go to like a makeup bar. I can spend 3 and 4 hours. To me, it helps the clerks understand I'm not casing the place. I'm not trying to stick anybody up, but just stuff like that. Things that are very nuanced ways in which neurodiversity shows up because of processing challenges or what have you. It helps to allay people's concerns, and it just gives information where it would not exist without that information. So, understanding. It gives understanding.
Absolutely.
Thank you for sharing that. And then we'll
Yeah,
move
I
on.
don't want to take too much of your time, Scott. I just wanted to jump in and say that I also think that people often anchor their identity into things such as the work they do and the skin color they have and other things like that. So by saying to you, you are not your diagnosis, they may as well be saying to themselves, you are not your work, or you are not this and that, because so rarely we're actually provoked by school or by our environment or just by our families sometimes even to kind of rethink our identity. So I think that question is just kind of like a mirror image of probably what's going on for their mind. Just wanted to.
Absolutely.
Uh,
So some other examples, and I've got an example for each of those parts of thought, and I just want to kind of skim through them a little on the quicker side. If you have, again, if you have thoughts or comments, maybe share so that we don't miss any of the great richness of this dialogue, because I do want to be mindful of everyone's time. So a question that I used to question an issue or ask about the question at issue. If someone takes exception to how an autistic person interacts with others, where is the source of the problem? So I'm asking about the issue, not about the person or the autistic person. A question about interpretation and inference. What leads the average everyday person to conclude that they've met or know somebody who is autistic? Again, it's asking about somebody to interpret and find out what it is that they are interpreting something and how they turn that into an inference about people. A question about concepts. How would autism be conceptualized and autistic people described if this work had been done by socialists or sociologists versus rather than psychologists? Imagine how autism would be framed if somebody else started the work. Assumptions. If you believe ABA is positive, beneficial, is a positive, beneficial approach to supporting autistic people, what assumptions do you hold about those who oppose ABA and why? And again, we're not attacking anybody. We're not attacking ABA. We're wanting to learn more about what assumptions they hold about others who have a different perspective. Implications and consequences. What would happen if we don't explore multiple perspectives of autism and why? Points of view. If treating symptoms and supporting autistic people are viewed as the same, why might an autistic person take offense to the idea of one, but not the other? So again, we want to see different points of view on this particular question or issue. Now let's that other framework, the different types of questions. This is a question asking about quality of reasoning, focusing on clarity. What are some of the examples of social norms or customs in the workplace that autistic people could find confusing? So helping people really draw out what they say, it's just this. Well, kind of give me some specific examples so we can gain clarity on the issue. Accuracy. How can you tell when a non-speaking autistic person's emotional state improves or worsens? So we're getting them to pinpoint, where is that dividing line? How do we know? Can you pinpoint this? Again, trying to get them to articulate what's maybe intuitive to them. Precision. What differences exist between specific behaviors exhibited by autistic people and the exact same behaviors of non-autistic people, if any? So we're asking questions to get them to differentiate one from another, that precision. Relevance. is the quantity of support needed by autistic people related to the type of support in any way? Why or why not? You know, we hear people talk about certain things in context with autism that may or may not have anything to do with autism itself, but about something else. So this question helps to really sort through what is relevant and what is not. Depth. What are the key factors in deciding who has rights to self-determination and who does not? And with questions around depth, asking a lot of follow-ups to kind of probe deeper and deeper and deeper till we finally get to that root of why people think a particular thing. Breadth, or the broadness, considering the medical model, the social model, self-identification, is one approach to identifying autism more legitimate than the other two? Why or why not? So now we're parsing out each of these three models with this question and really looking at identification through the multiple lenses so we have a broad overview and can talk about the different issues. Logic. Could a non-autistic person be conditioned to STEM when they're stressed, assuming they don't already STEM? So here we're asking questions about if we say we need to do X to help autistic people not do something, can that reverse work with somebody who isn't autistic? And we really start to dig into the logic of why we do certain things. Significance. Which is the most effective way to get others, especially with those who with strongly held beliefs that differ from yours, to listen to your perspectives? So here we're trying to tease out elements that are significant, which would help us then bring about change. And then lastly, of my examples, and I know I've been kind of spewing at the mouth, info dumping, but again, I want to leave time for some questions. Assuming that autistic people do have communication difficulties, would it be accurate or fair to say that non-autistic people also have communication difficulties? Why or why not? If it's good for the goose, is it good for the gander? And if not, let's talk about this fairness issue. So those are some examples of questions from my book and from my advocacy practice, where I'm using a Socratic approach to really get dialogue going and fostering this exchange of multiple views so we can really parse out the most important elements. We got a few minutes. Does anyone have any questions before we round out with one last brief closeout exercise?
Just wanted to mention that I'm a huge fan of the Socratic inquiry process. It's extremely powerful, and it really allows for radical engagement where a lot of other conversations and engagement falls flat by comparison. Thank you. Good work.
I've seen it do some amazing things, not only in my advocacy work, but well before then, when I really learned about this decades ago. It's a game changer.
You really stirred my juices with these questions, Scott. And I feel like here at Casey we could really use asking some of them. So I'm definitely gonna go back and try to find your book. So if you could also perhaps maybe put a link in a chat box or someplace, I don't know. I guess that would be the easiest to where we can find it.
Yes, and if you search for my last name on Amazon, you'll definitely find it there. But
Okay.
I will put a link there, absolutely.
Okay, great. Casey Sparks has a hand risen.
Hey, Roger.
That's me. Thanks, Scott. This is I feel like this is like the tip of the iceberg here. So very interesting and intellectually very, very stimulating. I mean, I love this idea. I guess one thing that makes me wonder is, are there sort of prerequisites for people engaging in this method that you're describing?
So engaging from a participate in the dialogue, or engaging from the perspective of starting the dialogue?
I'm thinking probably both, because you could start it. And my concern is that, especially we've certainly seen in more recent days that a lot of conversations can kind of quickly go off the rails, so to speak. And there seems to be, in order for people to be able to do this productively, it seems like that there has to be sort of a mutual agreement, beforehand, that people will engage in certain ways, or or maybe it's more like, if you're going to discuss things deeply, I guess you have to be pretty confident, and you really have to know the material. And how many people get into, say, disputes without really knowing material, but more from an emotional stance. And then if that's the case, then does that kind of escalate to sort of non-productive discourse?
Right. So the easy one, the prerequisite for engaging, is have a pulse in your breathing and are willing, I guess is really it. For leading it, I hear what you're saying, but I think I can have a dialogic or Socratic dialogue with somebody about physics. I don't know anything about physics. The key is to be inquisitive. So even if you don't know the topic well at all, being willing to ask questions, being willing to put yourself out there and open to hearing from other people about it, and willing to do follow-ups and go, okay, well, why is that? This person said this, why is that not correct? Or how is yours different from theirs? So I think it's not about knowing the material as much as it is about willingness to go on a journey of discovery.
Yeah, and I guess that has to be, I mean, we can probably say that for ourselves as individuals, and our hope is that the conversational partner, or the person we're having this dialogue with, is engaging with the same spirit.
Yeah.
I guess it's hard to know. I mean, some people, they may think that they're just starting a conversation in good faith, but a lot of times people are more interested in getting their point across than actually understanding, and then I think that leads to a lot of complications, because it's not going both ways anymore.
Yeah, it can, and it actually happens regularly with me, and that's where, like I had mentioned earlier, silence is golden. And sometimes you're right. Sometimes people just want to be heard, and they want to share their perspective and nothing more. Let them have that space, and then maybe ask somebody else about, well, John said this, what do you think? And it's amazing if you take that kind of approach. And I have some good examples from my LinkedIn dialogue where somebody held a really strong opinion about a topic, and it's not coming to my mind. I do talk about this in my book, but by the time our string of turns back and forth ended, they ended with, I'll have to think about that a little bit, which is a huge positive, because now we went from, they had a very strong opinion that differed from others and they were not going to budge, to, I'll think about it.
Thanks. I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, one thing would probably be to keep in mind that, I mean, as probably what you're doing in that situation is knowing that the kind of conversation that you may have envisioned is not going to happen
Yeah.
based on the response you're getting, and being okay with that, and not and still maintaining the conversation so it ends on a productive note.
Absolutely. And I think that's part of the burden of being an advocate is your emotions will get smashed from time to time. There's just no getting around that. But knowing how to take it that step back and realize what's happening and be able to refocus and either steer the conversation in a different, more productive way, or decide that, okay, this is not going to be a productive conversation, so we're going to end it here, and thank them for their contributions. All right, I saw a few hands, but I didn't know who was first. And Anna, how are we doing on time? I see it's right at 5:30.
Well, yeah, we've approached the end of the session, but it's up to you, Scott. We can continue if you would mind
I'm happy to
giving us a few more
start
minutes.
willing.
And
And
we have. I don't have a question.
My
Question has been answered already. So.
Thank you, Anna. So Scott, one thing, and what Roger, I believe, said, silence is golden. One thing I've had to learn to do for myself and my mental health is, and a lot of us probably suffer from rumination and anxiety, and things I found to work around it are, if you've heard of the Wim Hof method, I found that works for me very well. The breathing techniques, learning to be mindful. When thoughts come into my head that are negative, it's really not me, I believe, and I just let it kind of pass like a cloud, and just let it go. And it has some significance, but I release it. But I'm finding to be more mindful is really helpful. And another thing too is I've discovered just cold water immersion, and I will submerge myself into freezing cold water a lot. And even like I live way up north, so I'll go to the pond and I'll dig an ice hole, and it gets so cold you can't even think. Like it shuts your brain off. And ever since I've been doing this, it has been so helpful. My anxiety has been reduced. I don't ruminate anymore, and I have this confidence I didn't have before. So just facing your fear or facing something scary, you gain so much, especially for an autistic person. Um, it's just go for it. Like do whatever you need to do to set yourself straight. But the one thing I'd like to tell everyone is just practice. Really find what mindfulness is. Learn how to shut your brain off. Stop talking to yourself and just find your peace and harmony and stillness inside.
I think that's sage advice. And a couple of things that I do. One I used to do more when before I started having some health issues was I was a marathoner and a triathlete. So to go out on a long run or a 2-mile swim, you get that a runner's high is a real thing, and talk about a Zen state. And then the other thing that I do is I go out into my garden and just focus on my plants and forget about the world, and it does amazing for my psyche. So thank you. All right, any other thoughts? So I almost forgot this part, so I do apologize. There's the Q&A slide. So this is another, I've got a lot of quotes from Socrates that I love. And I think a couple of you had mentioned this already. I cannot teach anybody anything, but I can only make them think. And that's what I try to do with my advocacy work is I'm not trying to convince somebody that my way of seeing autism is the correct way. I think it's such an individual thing for both autistics and non-autistics that to say this is what you must accept as the capital T truth is not the approach to go. So I can't teach anybody anything, but I can certainly help them think about it by asking them questions. And with that, something I'll leave for you if you want to share your response to either of these questions. If not, take it offline and think about it. I know some of you have to go. What's one thing you got from this? And what is a powerful reflective question that you could ask to advocate for our community today?
Scott, can I say something here?
Absolutely. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How about yourself? Wonderful. You can ignore my messages that I couldn't get in here because someone finally let me in. No. For those who don't know me, I am the owner of a podcast for autistic adults by an autistic adult. Scott is both my dear friend. I call him my autistic twin straight brother because I'm gay. But we talk a lot and we have our points of agreement and disagreement. So that's who I am a little bit. Last April, one of my guests is from the United Kingdom, and they are working on an autistic language hypothesis. Because I have come to believe that there is, in fact, an autistic culture and an autistic language. And I think sometimes our issue with communication has to do with the fact that we talk a language that is not often understood. The autistic language hypothesis is based on how autistics communicate with other autistics, which is a brilliant thing because we often base our communication strengths or weaknesses on how neurotypical society thinks of communicating and what is the right way versus the quote, what is the wrong way, normal versus abnormal. Well, this idea is to stop doing that, okay? But to start thinking about how autistics communicate with autistics. When I am in a space with other autistics and I say certain things, we know what we understand. But when we try to communicate that to someone who is not, that's where we run into some problems. So the autistic language hypothesis doesn't care if somebody can speak. If they don't speak, they don't speak. That's not the issue. The issue is that we learn to not only accept us as being autistic individuals, but also a culture that is very different from. And so what that autistic language hypothesis is trying to insert here is a conversation that needs more conversation. Because, like I say, when we communicate with other autistics, I can talk about a sensory overload, understand what I go through because he goes through it. If I talk about the fact that I'm out of spoons, most of you are going to understand what I'm talking about. But if I say that to somebody who isn't, they're going to say, what's that? You know, I have had, this is just from a medical, this is from a different perspective. One of the things that constantly amazes me is that neurologists, diabetes educators, and doctors have no clue as to how autism is physical. I mean, I have had to explain to many of my diabetes educators about what interoception is, because when I talk about interoception with other autistics, they know what I mean. When I talk about it with someone who isn't, they're like, what's that? So
the point is lastly, I'm going to say this. There are 3 points that I always make, I often say in my podcast, and this needs to be part of this conversation before we stop, and I stop. I remember he said to me, "What should I do? I'm newly diagnosed. What should I do?" And I answered with what I say to many. You, as the autistic individual or person with autism, take your way of saying it, must become the expert about your own brand, make, and model of autism. If you are not an expert in yourself, you can't advocate for yourself because you don't know, or so you must become the expert, not an expert, the expert, and you must become the expert about how you communicate about your autism to others. And how do we do that? I know it's easy to get caught into explaining something, but there's another way that really does work. When we tell our stories about what being autistic means for us, and I know sometimes you feel like nobody's listening, they're just, covering their ears or not even thinking. That may be true, it is true, but at some point, when someone hears that I experienced a sensory overload because the fluorescent lights were buzzing so loudly, it actually made me sick. When you tell things like that a little bit more, when we tell those stories, people do kind of listen and they do kind of start to think. So Scott's book and the work that he's doing is to kind of help to get some people think. And as I actually have I did an endorsement. This is one way that we're starting those conversations, and that's what's so very important. Okay, I'm done.
Thank you. And to your point, asking those questions facilitates people in sharing their stories.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's one of those great things that this book does. And I mean, my podcast has a reputation, and I want to invite. The thing is my podcast has a reputation of being a safe space where autistic adults, the majority of my guests are autistic adults, where there's the space to talk about what you experience. It is a safe space for you to say it, where you will not be silenced or spoken over. So that's another thing. We need to work on creating safe spaces for us to have these conversations. And, it's a process that is a long way of coming, but it has to start somewhere. So.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I see you waiting. Go right ahead.
Yeah, so much food for thought here, and I really feel like this hit me right at the time where I needed it, and kind of could be a potential answer, or at least a starting point for solutioning with some of the challenges that I've been running into. Because when I see some attempts at building neuroaffirming products or spaces, I see people understanding a couple pieces of the puzzle and then building something based on that, which doesn't work for a whole bunch of other reasons. I've been having conversations with other people about, like this happens with workplace accommodations, or like even with products built specifically for neurodivergent people. And so I kind of gravitated towards like just kind of taking myself out of the discussion for a little bit and trying to build a framework, that's all encompassing, and, see if I can talk to people behind the scenes and then have something to give to the people who are building things. But, and, a lot of times they come to me kind of asking for it, like, how would you make this neuroaffirming? But I really need to understand what are the experiences of people using what they're building. And that can be tough too, because then I get like hyper vigilant, trying to, go in as a regular member, but observe everything that's happening and point out, let's say, for example, if this call wasn't moderated well, then, oh, there were two people who said something and then were cut off. And like pointing out all of these things kind of bottom up. And I really want to get better at getting people to slow down and realize that they need to think so we can have a deeper conversation. So I'm very excited to read this book and hopefully keep connecting.
Awesome. Thank you very much for sharing and for your kind words. Really appreciate it. All right. Well, let me turn it back over to Anna and Roger. And again, thank you for allowing me this time to speak in your network of community, rather. I really appreciate it. And feel free, anyone, if you want to connect, reach out to me through LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect with you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Scott. Thanks for sharing your insights with us today and for awakening within us such a desire to discuss. So yeah, thanks so much for your time. And thank you to everyone who participated.
Thank you.
All right, I think this is a good place to say bye and good night to me.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, take care, everyone. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.